Good afternoon. It is Thursday, March 13th. I'm Eric Settle, former candidate for Attorney General, and I'm here with my co-host, Rafe D'Amico.
Hey Eric, how's it going?
It's good, Rafe. We missed a week, and in the world we live in now, you miss a week and you've missed a lot.
I
So
mean, it's basically like, growing up in the 80s, it'd be like missing almost a full season, you know? Speaking of
it's
seasons, and thankfully that spring is we're knocking on the door of spring.
it's interesting. We started this podcast and it was quite dark and quite cold, and now it's springtime is almost here in the Philadelphia area, which is great.
Lots of green shoots. I think we bring a lot of sunshine to a lot of people. I had a lot of my friends and family asking where is our Pinot and Policy last week, and I had to let them know that my amazing co-host was on vacation in Colorado. We don't have to give details of where you were, but what are we going to be getting into today? What are we talking about, Eric?
Well, I think, Rafe, today we're going to start with something that always seems to be on everybody's mind, which is the economy
Mm.
and what's going on with both the stock market and tariffs. Then we're going to talk a little about Ukraine. And, since the last time we spoke, a lot has happened with Ukraine. We're going to talk about the government reorg and what Elon Musk is doing and how the courts are standing up to Elon. And then we're going to talk a little about the First Amendment and some ideas around what can you do under the First Amendment. And that's relevant because there's a case this week involving a protester at Colombia who the United States is seeking to remove from the country because he's protesting the war in Gaza. And then we'll see what other topics we can come up with.
Sounds fun. Well, as always, we try to have conversations about government policy and politics with some wine and levity mixed in, hence the name Pinot and Policy. And, we hope that we bring interesting perspectives on these topics. One from a boomer, one from a Gen Xer, and hopefully a different one from anybody that's actually listening. But we hope to have civil discourse on what at times could be contentious topics so that we can better understand varying perspectives in the U.S. and our world. So with that, which of these lovely topics, Eric, do you want to dive into first?
Well, let's talk about something that I think is the most important for everybody, which is the economy and how the economy fits in with the stock market. So at the very beginning of our efforts to do this, I focused on the fact that we should watch what Donald Trump does and not what he says. And now that we've had 6 weeks of the Trump administration, we recognize that a number of the things that he's saying is actually affecting things.
It
So
is. I feel like a lot of these economists and people in the stock market weren't listening to what he was saying because all he talked about the entire campaign trail was tariffs, 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 tariffs. And now that we have tariffs, the stock market is basically taking a dump for the last week.
right. It has been, the market as of today, the S&P, which is the broader measure of the stock market's health, is down 10%. So that means that everybody's 401k, everybody's retirement plan, everybody's stock accounts, and that involves, everybody, not everybody, but most people have some 401k account. And we're having one of those moments where you really just don't want to look at their statements because that number is going to be smaller.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the majority of the United States does not own stocks, and the majority of people unfortunately do not have 401ks. So you in reality you could be looking at this from a populist perspective. He's not hurting his base. Not that he's looking or is looking or not looking to hurt people on purpose. It's you argue it's a casualty of the policies they're looking to put in place. I don't think any administration goes in and says we want to damage the economy or the stock market, but that's nonetheless what is happening. But to the most Americans, it's not impacting their bank accounts. It's not impacting their investments. But to maybe a lot of his donors and a lot of the business community and a lot of the tech bros that we saw during his inauguration, Elon being the biggest one, they're taking a bath. Some of these companies, they're losing just billions and billions of dollars of market value.
Yeah, but see, Rafe, I would disagree with you. I think many more people, the number of people who own individual stocks in the stock market is relatively small.
Right.
But the number of people who have a 401k plan or a pension plan or frankly, even an insurance plan, which is affected by the stock market, is much broader, right? The tech bros are getting crushed. I mean, those folks are losing huge amounts of money, but everyone is being impacted. And even for just everyday Americans, I mean, the prices of things have not gone down. And what you're having, and the president said this
Well,
this week,
eggs are going back down. Eggs have come back down a little bit.
eggs are back down.
And
Okay.
and if this inquiry is correct, I just did a Google search and a Chat GPT search, and it looks like about 56% of Americans have a 401k.
Okay. So that's a lot of people. So and the issue here is
Hold on,
that
let me
yeah.
frame that. Let me frame that accordingly. 56% of American workers have a 401k, not necessarily American voters and people. Um, so that's about 71 million workers, so it is less than half Americans if you include everybody. But of
Okay.
workers, it's about half, a little more than half the workers.
Right.
And
And
not
what the
everybody
and
works.
what
Not everybody
right.
works.
Right. And what the president is saying is, look, there may be some short-term pain to get to long-term success. And I know the Treasury Secretary was saying that
Just in
today.
time for the midterms. But yeah, go ahead.
Right. And the answer is, look, and I think a number of Trump supporters have said, I can put up with this in the short term. And that's fair. In other words, as someone who has been a professional investor, the truth is, volatility like this happens. But the problem is, it doesn't seem like there's a plan for where we're going with this.
Right. So that's, yeah, I have to remind myself sometimes that you did have a stint as a financial advisor. So you're a little bit more informed in this topic than most, definitely more informed than me. So yeah, it's not exactly, it's not, no, nobody, no, it's like I said, opening the topic, I don't think no administration goes into their campaign saying they want to hurt the economy, but hey, if you are taking the attitude of, if you want to make an omelet, you got to crack a few eggs, you might as well do it when you have the most political capital, which is typically right when you start an administration. And if you know you're going to have to go through some short-term pain, yeah, you have it during your first year, because then by year two, maybe you start to come around. You've got the midterm elections that will occur, and hopefully there's a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel by then. So, I mean, should we just be conceding that for 2025, basically, we're going to have a down year. We're going to possibly go into recession. And people should just kind of batten down the hatches and put on some foul weather gear.
Well, I think that's certainly possible. And look, I think a recession was sort of possible just because we've had so much growth over the last, 10, 12 years that it was, almost inevitable that we go through another recession. That's just the way economic cycles work. It seems like we're hastening the entrance into a recession. And again, there's this idea of the wealth effect, which is when the stock market is going up, people feel good. Stock market is going down, people want to pull back. So sometimes, I mean, look, it's very possible. And look, I guess the question is if you come out the other end, does it make sense? So here's one of the thoughts. I mean, as we've watched, part of what this is causing this is the trade wars that the president has begun with our largest trading partners, Mexico and Canada. And today, he announced, actually a 100% tariff on French and European wines.
Yeah, I heard it could go up to 200%. This is very
Yeah, that's
concerning, Eric. I mean, in a show called Pinot and Policy, like it looks like we're going to be buying all of our Pinot is going to be coming from Willamette Valley and Russian River Valley, and and maybe some other areas, but definitely not going to be looking to buy much Burgundy. Buy your Burgundy now, right? Buy
right.
it
Well,
when prices.
I'm glad that our last episode we took some time to talk about Burgundy because I mean if this goes into place, it's going to be really unaffordable. It's already expensive. And again, this idea of does it make sense in a global economy to enact these high trade barriers in a way that seems to be just retaliatory? I mean, I mean, it was interesting this week.
Is it, wait, quick interjection, is it retaliatory or is it negotiating?
Well, so we'll use an example I was about to go to. So as a result of the tariffs on Canada, the premier of Ontario, a guy named Doug Ford, who's actually a pretty famous guy, he got
You
into
mean
some fights
the
in
governor
the.
of Ontario?
He's the governor of Ontario. He's the governor of Ontario. Well, unless it's just one big state, he's the governor of Ontario, and he announced a 25% surcharge on electricity going to New York, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and so the president then slapped double the tariffs on aluminum, and then Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, went to Doug Ford and said, "Hey, can we work this out?" And Doug Ford turned those surcharges off, and so the president dropped the double tariff. But negotiating to what end? That's my question.
Well, yeah, we'll see what the actual outcomes are, right? Because who knows? But the party line is, well, oh, it brings more, it entices companies to reshore, to bring jobs and manufacturing back to the United States, and that, besides the fact that it's going to create more jobs, it's going to help our supply chain. It's going to make sure the supply chain is all in the U.S. or with our close neighbors. So it's actually a national security interest to be doing this. I mean, the narrative makes sense, but the question is, will that actually happen? And if it does happen, what is the impact to everyday prices? What's the ripple effect of this reshoring, and does it actually work the way that people hope and think that it's going to work? I mean, you hear some people saying that they're following the playbook of, I'm blanking on his name, but the head of state down in Argentina, who which
Uh, Maduro?
no,
No, no. Oh, Juan
starts with an
Perón?
M. Starts with an M.
Um,
Um, Hold on. Well, this is
not
easy.
Juan. Not thinking Juan Perón. Thinking Venezuela or Argentina?
No, Argentina. Argentina. Yeah, Javier Milei.
Okay.
And I mean, this, just to give perspective, this is the guy that had Elon Musk come on stage and he gifted Musk, a buzzsaw, a chainsaw, and Musk proceeded to wield it all around the stage. And now, like, just we've got memes of that all over the internet. But that seems to be the playbook that they're following, or and it seems to be somebody that they're, like, whose ideology, economic ideology, they seem to be in line with. And we'll see.
Right.
We'll see
Yeah.
if it
I look.
works.
I think the answer. Look, I think it's okay to be protective of certain industries, but I just wonder, and I guess part of it is it seems like there's no plan here. That it seems to be very reactive and very personal.
I don't know.
And
I think there is a plan. I mean, I know it seems like sporadic and chaotic and, off the cuff, and yes, you can certainly look at the day to day and say it's you're getting whipsawed, right? It's like, well, tariffs are on, tariffs are off. Well, wait, they're back on again, but at half of what they were before. To me, it reads, and I'm not arguing that this is a great strategy or even a good strategy. I'm just simply saying I think we're misdiagnosing why it's being done. I think in their mind the plan is to use tariffs to negotiate, and and that's why you're seeing, it's like we're seeing the negotiation in live action, right? It's not like it's happening in a room and they're pounding out these details either in a day or over weeks, and then we see the outcome. We're literally, and this is just Trump, right? Like, this is the lesson. And what we know about Trump is he uses the media as a tool, right? So he is negotiating with these people publicly, as much as JD Vance tried to chastise Zelensky for trying to, like, negotiate in the media, or have diplomacy play out in the media, just with some back and forth. It's almost like there was some projecting there. That we're literally seeing these negotiations play out in real time, and that's why it seems like it's such a mess and chaotic, because negotiations are sloppy and messy, and that is their plan. So they have a plan, they're sticking to it. It's just a really messy plan.
Right. So let's talk about Ukraine for a second. That's a good transition. So we've had kind of 2 weeks since we've talked about this stuff, and when we now have had the blow up in the Oval Office,
Mm-hmm.
where the president publicly chastised the president of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
We also, the following week, the president paused military aid, and also paused intelligence sharing, and basically said, "You've got no cards," and he started taking cards away. So now we go another week, and there's discussions have started, and as of today, Vladimir Putin said that he's not interested right now in a ceasefire. President, essentially, the president Zelensky came back, apologized, essentially in a way apologized to the president, said, "I am ready for peace. I'm ready for a ceasefire." And the president said, "Great." He turned back on the military aid, he turned back on the intelligence, and sent Marco Rubio, actually sent Steve Witkoff Steve Witkoff to Russia today. And apparently the word is that Putin is not categorically rejecting a ceasefire, but he has certain nuances that he wants.
Maybe he wants more leverage, right?
Right.
He wants to see, like, if they can gain more territory. Who knows? Who knows? I still feel like that entire event between Zelensky, Trump, and Vance, to me, that was pure theater. And, for all we know, Trump and Putin have already cut a deal. And whatever that deal is, it's now a fait accompli. And part of that deal might have been that Zelensky has to go. I think we're gonna be hard pressed to think of any kind of deal that Putin would accept where Zelensky remains in power of whatever territory is Ukraine, whether that includes, whether that's what it is now, whether it goes back to the pre-war borders, if part of the Donbas region goes back to Russia, or if, at one point Zelensky was saying he's not going to settle for peace until they get Crimea back. So who knows what kind of borders we're talking about. But whatever those borders are, I don't think Putin's going to accept Zelensky being the head of state. And hey, what do I know? I'm no, like, geopolitical scientist here, but that's the way that it read to me, especially when right after that incident, you have Lindsey Graham, of all people, who was the biggest cheerleader for Ukraine and Zelensky, doing a complete 180 and just, towing the Trump administration line, and scolding Zelensky for what happened. The fact that Lindsey Graham then turned his back on Ukraine directly after that, to me, reads that the GOP is starting to back away from Zelensky and to use him as an excuse for why there's not peace. And
Well, it's interesting because I looked at that situation is a little differently. I think Lindsey Graham was embarrassed because he had literally met with Zelensky earlier that day and probably said, "Whatever you do, don't get in a fight with these people." And he got in a fight with those people. Now, I would argue it wasn't his fault, although I will say that when I've, zaprudered the film, as it's an expression for those of you who aren't familiar, where Abraham
frame.
Yeah, right. Abraham Zapruder took the film of the Kennedy assassination. So the expression to
with the JFK Kennedy
the
assassination.
JFK assassination,
Yeah.
right? That they say to Zapruder something is to basically look at it frame by frame to see what exactly happened. And the truth is that I will say that when Zelensky said what he said as it related to, we have an ocean that protects us, but soon we will feel it. That felt very threatening to me. Basically Zelensky saying the war's coming to you, and the president reacted as a reasonable president would react, which was, "Don't tell me a war's coming this way." But to your point, but what does that say that as part of peace, is that is Vladimir Putin is allowed to remove the war hero, the guy who really has been a hero for his country, to replace him with whom? Another sort of Putin-aligned leader?
Yeah, I mean, this is the fun part, right? It's like it all depends which reality one decides to believe, because in the reality that we all see in the collective reality in the West, the quote unquote West, is that Zelensky is a democratically elected leader, right? But the reality in Russia and other parts of the world is that Zelensky is a U.S. puppet, and it's part of the CIA, and it even the fun part here is that it even overlaps with U.S. aid, right? And how U.S. aid, the organization that was attacked right away from the Trump administration, this was one of the countries that they were putting money into candidates and money into pushing down candidates that were supportive of regimes or tied to countries that weren't favorable to the U.S. You literally see money being funneled into propaganda machines. So, like, who knows what really, if when you look under the hood of what was going on there, how much money was being funneled into Ukraine to support Zelensky, and how much money was being funneled into Ukraine to support the opposing candidates. And you got to forgive me, I can't remember the name of the candidate who was there that was, like the pro-Russian candidate before,
Right.
but the Russian people, the majority of them, especially Putin, see that person as the real candidate and the candidate that the Russian people in Ukraine wanted to have, or even that a lot of the Ukrainian people in Ukraine wanted to have. So a lot of this depends on which reality somebody believes.
Well, I guess, look, that's one of the problems in the world we live in, which is there are different streams. And in fact, one of the things that started the fight between Trump and Zelensky was the fact that Zelensky said that it seems as though the president was kind of caught in a Russian disinformation bubble. So I hear what you're saying. I just think, again, it seems like we'll see. What's interesting, we'll see, is whether or not Putin will be willing to um, bring a ceasefire, at least to have a negotiation. I mean, again, you think about wars. You start by stop shooting each other, and then you try to figure out if you can work it out. I mean, that's obviously there's been a ceasefire in Gaza now that's held for about a month. Most of the living hostages have been returned. That's been a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the president gets credit for bringing the hostages home more quickly. And what happens next is kind of an open question.
So does the president also get credit for arresting, somebody with a green card, who's I guess a U.S. resident, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
has a lot of the protective rights as that a U.S. citizen does. I mean, I think outside of being able to vote, this individual basically has the same protective rights as any other U.S. citizen. Was he married or engaged? What was the details on this,
I,
Eric?
I don't know, but it's interesting because that's an interesting story that happened this week. The fact is, there's actually a statute. I forget, it's USC something that prevents green card holders from supporting terrorist organizations.
So, and just for context, we're talking about the case of Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian activist and Columbia University graduate, who was recently arrested because he was participating in protests on campus, right, in Columbia's
Right.
private
Correct.
university. So that factors in. He has a green card, and he's either if he has a green card, I'm assuming he's married. Then he's probably married to a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
We could do some digging on that, but so then the devil's in the details, like with most things, right? It's like, okay, well, you could have your green card revoked if it's proven if there's proof that you have ties to a terrorist organization, obviously with
Right.
terrorists
Right.
becoming U.S. citizens, but how do you define that? If somebody, like, where does that line kind of gets blurred of when is it free speech to have a view on a war? And for all we know, there's a lot that we don't know, right? I think this is a perfect example of people jumping to conclusions based off of your preconceived ideas, right? Like if you're pro-Israeli in this war, you're going to immediately say, well, this is a perfect example of how, Jewish students are getting terrorized on campus, and this shouldn't be happening. And yeah, get rid of this guy, get him out of here. But and if you're pro-Palestinian, then you're looking at this and you're saying you're gonna jump to your conclusions on that side of the argument, right? Like, well, how could you do this? He has a green card. He's a U.S. resident. Like, he's protected by rights. Like, but the reality is we don't know if there are any ties to a terrorist organization, right? I don't think we know
Right.
that
We
yet.
can assume, I think we can assume for purposes of this case that all he's doing is exercising otherwise a First Amendment right to protest.
Which is
And
scary. If
right,
that's
right,
all
right.
he's doing, this is setting a dangerous precedent. Whatever you believe in, this is setting a dangerous precedent for free speech.
Exactly right. So, even if you are right, so this is, and the question becomes is, does the First Amendment extend to a permanent resident? And what's interesting about what's going on with a lot of the things the Trump administration is doing is many of these are being challenged in the courts. And you're starting to see a series of results that I think to me says that the courts will uphold the Constitution and the law, but that it's a little unclear as to where a president's power extends. So let me give you some examples. So with the USAID contracts, where money was frozen that had already been designated to go out the door, um, the Supreme Court decided that 5-4. So you had John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett voting with the progressive justices to say, no, you can't just stop money that Congress has appropriated, and send it back to the lower court. And the lower court obviously is now enforcing the Supreme Court order to say, make sure this money gets paid. But that judge also said it doesn't mean that for future contracts and future payments that an administration can't start to cut the money off. The issue here is the president was basically saying I know the money was already going, but we froze it. Mm-hmm. So that was an example of that. Another decision that came out today is all those probationary workers who were fired because they were poor performers. The court ordered today that they're to be reinstated. Okay, this is the judge. This is like a Reagan appointee on the West Coast who, called this thing sham.
Reagan
Now,
appointee, the judge has to be a little long in the tooth as
a little long in the tooth.
An appointee, right?
This judge also said that while those people have to be reinstated, the fact that other agencies are beginning to have reductions in force orders issued, okay, that's okay. Because what the courts are saying is that, and we've talked about this, there's a proper way to reduce the size of government. And Elon and the Doge boys, okay, that's not the way to do it. And to tell workers that they're performing badly as a pretext when it's not true, the court is reversed. So we'll see what happens, whether all those folks start, get their jobs back. But that's what the court ordered today.
It is messy, and it'll be interesting, to see what happens with this, the protest case, because what I think we hope as citizens, right, is like you don't I don't want to see this case play out as it's a political football where it's like, the GOP has their belief, the Democrats have their belief, and regardless of what's right and wrong and what the law says, it's like people are just predetermining how they feel about it because of their political beliefs or because of their ideological beliefs, whether they're pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian.
Right.
It really, that should not be factored into this. I know it's easier said than done, and that's where we as humans typically tend to go with these things because it's highly emotional. But I mean, if you look at even in the history of our country, you look at some of our founding fathers. You look at John Adams. He was one of the biggest patriots in the Revolution, and yet he defended British soldiers in the Boston Massacre, right? Not
Right.
because he was somebody who was pro monarchy, but because he was pro law. He was pro law, and he was and the idea of being innocent until proven guilty,
Right.
the right to have a trial.
No, and Rafe, last week the president issued an executive order that banned the law firm of Perkins Coie, one of the most respected law firms in the country, from doing business with the federal government or even appearing in federal facilities because they assisted the Hillary Clinton. In other words, that's the example. And a court, I'm happy to report that a temporary restraining order was issued that has temporarily stopped that order. But think about that. President of the United States says, you know, a law firm is banned from working with the federal government because they represented clients appropriately. Again, to your John Adams example,
Mm-hmm.
it just seems that
You,
that just seems ridiculous.
we are it's scary because we are seeing too often retaliatory measures and witch hunts. Like it is not the country we want to have, but sadly that's the world that we're living in. You know, we can we take a moment? I want to pat ourselves on the back. We're doing a really good job with our transitions and segues here. This is this is naturally flowing. So we what do we have left as far as our topics? Because I know we've covered a lot, you know, we probably want to do only one more before we wrap
Right.
up. So
Well, I think on the political side, I think the other thing, we're talking about a little bit about is our Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania being a little more local. There's been some press out there. Obviously Josh is someone who's considered a front runner for 2028, and the issue for him is, when does he take the gloves off in terms of fighting against the president? And we talked about last week that he's kind of getting both. He's getting both fighting and he's trying to play nice. And I think the issue for him also is, he's got to run for reelection in 2026.
F
And so
governor you're talking about.
as governor. And
Yeah.
so he wants a nice big number. So I don't think he wants to be a partisan warrior um,
Until
until he has to. And look, I respect that because it's a bigger picture. Look, assuming assuming the president is not trying to run for reelection in 2028, he'll be running against a series of Republican candidates, and he wants to be in a position to hold on to his sort of centrist views.
he has been incredibly calculating, and I know sometimes people view that term kind of pejoratively, but I say that as a compliment. He's been incredibly methodical and calculating with every move that he's made, and so far his calculus has been pretty accurate. It's been pretty spot on, right?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think he's done a good job, and I think it's the right way. So I think that's that. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, just something a little lighter. The Academy Awards took place between the last time we spoke.
Oh, you
Um,
got
An-
to do
An-
it to me. Okay, let's talk the
I
Academy.
know Honora won Best Picture. Have you seen Honora?
I haven't, but I've read it's critically acclaimed, so now I feel obligated, right?
It is critically acclaimed, but I will tell you, it is the first few minutes of Nora is NSFW, as we like to say, not suitable for work.
Oh,
The
real.
first scene of the movie is in a strip club, and one of the things that I sort of smile about is Mr. and Mrs. America see who wins the Academy Award and says, "Oh, and Nora is now available on my cable system. Let me flip this on, and America is going to get a cheek in the face, or more appropriately, two cheeks in a face.
Well, hey, I think you know the euphemistic term is what, gentlemen's club, right? It's a,
Yes.
and they're stage performers, right?
Yep.
So yeah, it'll be uh now I gotta see it. Now I'm
It's a good
not,
it's a good movie. And the other recommendation that I just watched this week is the Ladies and Gentlemen, which is the SNL documentary of all the musical groups that have been on SNL
50
over the last
years.
50 years.
Yeah.
And it is just a remarkable collection of sort of musical icons, and then a few people that kind of completely vanished. Captain Beefheart was one of the groups that came and went very quickly.
Captain Beefheart. Well, hey, 50 years, you're not gonna hit a home run every time. You're not gonna bat 1,000. And thankfully, a lot of bands were discovered on SNL. For a lot of people, it was the first time they were seeing some of these bands. So that's great. That's great. Well, that's probably a good point to close. We got a lot of policy, a tiny bit of Pinot, and we closed off with a little bit of pop culture. So, as always, everyone, please leave comments. Please even if you didn't like it, just like it. Just like the show. Give us a thumbs up. Give us some comments. Please subscribe, and know that you can watch and listen on YouTube, and you can watch and listen on Apple, iTunes, and soon to be able to watch and listen on Spotify. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you soon on Pinot and Policy.
Thanks, Rafe. Good to see everybody, and see you soon.